The working-class populations of all the powers may not have welcomed the war, but they did not reject the duties and obligations it imposed. Phrases were coined, the Union sacrée in France and the Burgfrieden in Germany, to institutionalize this new-found domestic unity. There was a paradox in the flood of government white books, black books, and yellow books produced in 1914–15 to buttress these perceptions. Their focus was on the events of July 1914 itself, but their central debate concerned the issue of whether or not Germany was guilty of causing the war. The paradox was this: Austria-Hungary, not Germany, was the power that at the beginning of July 1914 planned to use war as an instrument of policy. Admittedly, the conflict it sought was designed to be short, localized, and fought between single powers, whereas the war that resulted was none of those things. For this, Germany was blamed, both then and since. Even Austria-Hungary cast aspersions on its ally, holding Germany responsible for getting it into a war which was bigger than it could handle. For the Entente, the foreign ministers of Russia and Britain, Sergei Sazonov and Sir Edward Grey, were convinced that Vienna would never have acted as it had done unless Berlin had pushed it. But if they were right, the causes of the war were not short-term, but long-term. Sazonov and Grey brought to the events of July 1914 assumptions formed before the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, and reckoned that their opposite numbers in Germany and Austria-Hungary had done so too. They were right in one respect. Germany had played the key role in changing the tempo of international rivalries. When Germany was united in 1871, its Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, set out to reassure the powers of Europe about the ambitions of the powerful new political entity that had emerged in its centre. And those powers directed their competitiveness to fields beyond Europe. When Britain and France confronted each other in Africa, they did not resort to war. Indeed, the original purpose of the Anglo-French Entente of 1904 was not to create a unified front against Germany, but to settle the two powers' long-standing imperial rivalries in North Africa. The deal left the French free to expand westwards from Algeria into Morocco. Germany, however, saw the Entente as creating a new diplomatic constellation in Europe itself. The independence of Morocco was guaranteed by an international convention of 1880. On the 31st of March 1905, the Kaiser landed in Tangiers and declared his support for the Sultan of Morocco. He had little interest in Morocco, but he was anxious to disrupt the Anglo-French Entente. Germany's heavy-handedness had precisely the opposite effect. The Entente hardened, and Britain as well as France began to see Germany as a potential enemy. This, the first of two crises over Morocco, showed that regional rivalries could no longer be handled by diplomats in a self-contained fashion, but were liable to be both Europeanized and militarized. The Kaiser's action made clear that Germany had cut loose from Bismarck's inheritance. Germany was no longer posing as an upholder of the existing order. Instead, it aspired to carve a fresh path. Berhard von Bülow, foreign minister in 1897 to 1900 and chancellor from 1900 until 1909, promoted a world policy, or Weltpolitik. This rested on the premise that the unification of Germany under Prussian leadership was not a culminating point in the history of the nation, but a new departure, a beginning, not an end. The political theorist Max Weber declared in his inaugural lecture at the University of Freiburg in 1895, "We must understand that the unification of Germany would have been better if it had never taken place, since it would have been a costly extravagance if it was the conclusion rather than the starting point for German power politics on a global scale." Weltpolitik was not a policy to use war for the fulfillment of German objectives. It did not make Germany responsible for the outbreak of the First World War.